All right, so it looks like we're going live.
Are we live?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay. Okay, so let's start. Ready, guys?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, you know what? I lost. I don't know what just happened.
I'm just reading stage is empty.
Oh, yeah, me too.
Yes. Hi everyone, let's just get into this little technical issue that got the slides have moved away. Let's, okay,
There we go.
There they are.
slides are back up. So
Okay.
here you go, guys.
Well, okay. Hi, everyone. It's great to see so many people here from so many countries. I'm honored to be sharing a panel with Jacob and Nacho again. We had a great talk at the CBC, and thanks to Laleman Brewing for bringing this back because there were still so many questions, and we're still researching a little more every day. So thank you for being here, and I hope we can be useful with everything we've researched and everything we're going to share today. So again, we're going to be talking about a pretty recent subject in the craft brewing world and not that recent in the industrial beer world, which is Mexican lagers. Some people don't know they're a thing and they actually have a lot of structure behind them. So we really hope you enjoy this and just let's get to it. So first of all, I want to introduce myself. I'm Alex Ancona from Playa del Carmen in Mexico, the Caribbean coast. I have a beer school and I've been judging beer and home brewing and being a consultant and pretty much traveling for beer for over a decade now, making many brewer friends around the world. And well, Mexican lagers is something I've been really involved in lately. So I'm really excited for everything to have a place and a stage right now in the brewing community worldwide. So thanks for being here again, and let's go to Jacob.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jacob Sembrano. I'm the head brewer at Cruz Blanca in Chicago. One of the founders. We've been open for about 10 years. And prior to that, I was at Goose Island for about 5. And I'm a native Texan from Austin, raised in Texas, born in Texas. At Cruz, we use a ton of local ingredients. We use a ton of Mexican ingredients, and we're basically just kind of inspired by modern day Mexico, by historical Mexico, and we try to brew, inspired by Mexico, pretty much.
Cool. And hello, everyone. My name is Ignacio Lomelí. I work for Laleman Brewing as a technical sales manager for Mexico and Central America. I'm talking to you from my home in Ensenada, which picture the Pacific Northwest in Mexico. So we're in the northwest corner of the country, very close to the border with the US. And well, I hope that you learn. We can help you learn something new at this presentation, that you enjoy it and have some fun. As Alex said, we had a great time at CBC, and we're uh, having a very similar presentation to that occasion.
Okay, so let's kick it, guys. Well, first, we wanted to explain how we structured this talk, and it was very difficult for us to everything we researched, everything behind all the aspects, both technical, historical, and cultural about Mexican lagers, were difficult to put in a specific order. So we decided the best order was chronological, and we went for a past, present, future approach. So this is a roadmap for this talk. We're gonna Mexican lager is a category of beers that definitely has an industrial past and an industrial root, but we really believe that it still has a great future in the craft world ahead of it. And we hope to influence a lot of future very interesting beers in this category that's many times misunderstood. So we're gonna take this approach. We're gonna start with the past. Then we're gonna switch to the present, where Jacob is gonna go through a little bit of what the craft beer community is doing right now with Mexican lagers, and then we're gonna end up talking about the future and what we think is a very bright future for this category of beers. So let's go for it. The first, when we talk about the past in Mexican lagers, is their origin. Where do Mexican style lagers come from? There's a lot of maybe romantic information behind the past of Mexican lagers, but not very accurate if you start digging a little deeper and researching a little deeper. So, first of all, Mexican lager actually has real roots. It's not just a marketing invention from the 21st century. We're going to go through a little bit of the craft representation of the style later in the talk. But first of all, Mexican lager came to our country when we were definitely not a beer drinking country. No, we used to drink ferments. We're also going to talk about how we were kind of a beer drinking country because we also have a couple of very ancient pre-Hispanic beverages fermented that would actually be considered beer by definition. So we're going to go through them a little bit too. But, well, definitely European brewing influence is what brought beer to this continent in general. But there's a lot of romanticism behind the fact of our emperor, Maximiliano de Habsburgo. And Maximiliano, who was an Austrian emperor we had in Mexico, what people usually don't realize is his emperor time lasted 3 years. I mean, there wasn't even time for him to bring all these brewmasters from Austria to create the Vienna Empire that defined later Mexican industry. So that sounds really nice, but it's actually not that accurate when it comes to digging a little deeper in history. Most of our brewing influence actually came from the US, no? And we have a little more of German influence when it comes to beer than Austrian. So yes, we did brew a bunch of amber adjunct lagers, very much inspired in styles like Vienna, but it's not just as precise as just saying Maximilian just brought all these brewmasters and demanded Viennas to be brewed all around. Most of the companies that started lagers in Mexico, like Toluca Lager, which is our first official recognized lager, was actually Swiss-owned. And the brewmasters that came for most of the project that started developing, most came from the States where they already had a background of adapting. And that's why we're mentioning local adaptation, adapting everything they knew from brewing in Europe to the reality in this side of the ocean, because the malts weren't the same. They just found base malts that work totally different. So in putting adjuncts into the recipes were adopted by multiple reasons. We're going to go through them today. Corn and rice were the staple adjuncts to create these beers and to help out the differences between the base malts they found in this side of the Atlantic. So we're going to talk a lot about adjuncts. Now, adjunct lagers, a lot of people don't see the difference between one adjunct lager and another, and it's reasonable because easy drinking lagers are similar in a lot of ways. But I think if we're in this talk, we're not just easy beer drinkers. We like to see a little bit behind what we drink. So why did corn and rice enter the picture? Well, first of all, there's two separate ways we're going to later in the brewing aspect of the talk about these two roads. One of them is the technical adaptation, the grain availability, as we said, and the base malts that they found. Sometimes adjuncts can be really helpful in adding this bright character, lowering a little bit the body, drying out the beer, and let's say climate-driven drinkability. The food and the climate here just demanded very high drinkable beers if they wanted to make this country a beer drinking country. We're still not like a super high beer drinking country like the Czech Republic or Germany, maybe, but we're definitely a beer drinking country after a few centuries of this. So they adapted the beer to the gastronomy, to the climate, and of course, they had to do the technical adaptation because what they found, also economic supply realities. They wanted the same base malts they were used to working with, but they couldn't find them here that easily. So when the industry started developing in our country, the lagers started shaping into what later evolved into what we're going to talk about, what is a Mexican lager today. So first of all, let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is the similarities between American and Mexican adjunct lagers. For a lot of people, they're just the same. Like if you put just a Mexican image in a can, then your American lager becomes a Mexican lager. But we definitely researched that the differences are several in the fermentation profile, but particularly in the cultural difference of what the corn means to us as Mexicans and what corn means to pretty much any other country. There's many countries where corn is a part of the culture, but in Mexico, it's just the main staple of our culture, of our gastronomy. We call ourselves hijos del maíz, children of the corn. There's so much mythology behind corn since our pre-Hispanic cultures. So there are similar beers like the Spider-Man meme. If you see just a picture of both, you could say, well, they're pretty much the same beer, but we have to dig a little deeper. So again, it's the same ingredient. Corn was a technical adjunct in the US and in other countries where adjuncts were being used for lager and industrial lager production. But in Mexico, corn just has a different meaning. It's not just an adjunct, it's life, it's identity. We also want to be very clear. We're very thankful for every single brewer who ever brewed a Mexican lager, because thanks to this repeated pattern of seeing Mexican lagers in breweries, I know not every brewer took the cultural side of the Mexicanity of their Mexican lagers, like brewers like Jacob, but every single batch helped to put the style in the stage where even us as Mexicans started researching about it. So we want to be thankful to all the brewers in the US and around the world who ever brewed a Mexican lager. Maybe some of them were a little gimmicky when it came to the Mexican. Oh, yeah, just like put a sombrero in the label and call it a Mexican lager. But eventually, I see so much interest into making them more authentic, and brewers are pretty serious with their craft. So I think what we're proposing is just to be a little more serious about what being Mexican means for a beer and for everything in our culture. So we are going to tell you later today in the future aspect of this roadmap what we propose as a future maybe terroir kind of possibility for the category. But we're not saying if you didn't use like this ancient heirloom corn variety from Oaxaca, then your beer is not authentic. I think it's Mexican lager is not as a purity thing, as nobody will take it that way. So keep brewing Mexican lagers. Whatever you do is good. If you use corn flakes that are available in your area and you use them as a technical tool, that's a Mexican lager too, because not everything has to be super romantic and culturally profound. But we do want to inspire people to just dig a little deeper again. So what makes a lager Mexican? Well, of course, the use of corn or maize, it's a part of a staple. Yes, rice was also important, and we also had some rices coming, but rice is not as important in our culture as corn is. Rice is grown everywhere in Mexico too, and it's a big part of our gastronomy too. But corn is just, again, the main thing about our culture. Also, a highly disciplined fermentation profile that Nacho is going to guide us later today. Sometimes there's even some aromas or fermentation products that people think belong in a Mexican lager. And actually, when you start, again, digging deeper, we found that actually there's a pretty defined fermentation profile that you can kind of differentiate it from other international pale lagers. Noble hop restraint. Hops in Mexican lagers are pretty much used as a technical tool for balance, not something you want to stand out in your beer. And of course, the eternal drinkability. We call it pisteability in Mexico. Drinkability is such an important thing for Mexican beer. Our gastronomy is usually full of complex flavors, and we like our spice and our heat in the food. So something drinkable and approachable and easy to spread around country like Mexico was definitely very, very important. Of course, maize, we're going to call it our cultural anchor and also our technical driver. So we also already talked about these two roads. So it is a technical tool when it comes to brewing, but it's also a cultural symbol, as we just talked. Corn for Mexico is I think our gift to the world, not because there wasn't any. Well, I mean, every country grows corn nowadays, but the way of turning this teosinte wild plant into what we know as corn today, as a grain that you can actually store and export and use in many countries and adapt, was actually a pre-Hispanic gift to the world. Also, processes like nixtamal, which I'll explain in the next slide because we have a picture of it, were also a gift to the world because our pre-Hispanic cultures not only learned how to grow corn properly as an agricultural system, they also learned how to make it more nutritious, how to turn it into dough, into masa, and how to use it for many different things. So yes, beer, as we know it and as it was known in Europe, came from European influence and from brewers from the US and Europe. But fermentation of grains wasn't nothing new for Mexicans. We had a bunch of pre-Hispanic ferments, some of them actually, by definition, beers, ancient beers. No? So we're going to talk a little bit about them. Just a few, because there's a whole bunch depending on the state and the region in the country you're located at. But I'm going to talk about a couple in particular, which is Tesguino and Tejuino, which I found out even Mexicans sometimes don't see the differences between those two. They use the word like it's the same because it sounds pretty similar, but they're actually from a different part of the country and they're totally different drinks. So let's go to a picture. Well, before we go to the pictures, I want to mention pulque in the last bullet, because pulque is not a grain beverage. That wouldn't be a beer by definition, but we are talking about pre-Hispanic cultures fermenting drinks to create alcoholic beverages or fermented beverages. Pulque is actually from the agave sap and it involves other microorganisms. But again, this just shows that fermenting beverages, and even though they didn't call it science, it was more a religious ritual kind of thing. Fermenting was actually something pretty developed in our culture before the beer arrived. So these are the pictures. On the left side, you're going to see cold weather in the Raramuri, in the Tarahumara regions, in the northeast mountains of our country. That's Tesguino. And Tesguino, I actually like to see it sort of like a Mexican lambic or wild ale. It involves many technical things that amazes me how they could do it in the middle of a mountain with very limited equipment. But the corn is so sacred for the Raramuri, different varieties of corn. And the Tesguino is actually a drink that involves malting corn. So they use malted corn to actually be able to have more fermentable sugars and achieve a higher degree of alcohol, because this wasn't just food for them, because it does the process actually increases the protein level of the drink. So it was actually food for them, it was energy, and it was sharing, it was happiness. And of course, they could actually ferment up to 5 or 6 ABV, which is amazing in a setup like that. And that definitely helped with the cold nights and the weather in the mountains in the Tarahumara region. On the other side, tejuino in the middle picture is actually made from nixtamal dough. So it's a very different process. The nixtamal, for whoever doesn't know the process behind it, is actually basically cooking corn in an alkaline solution, calcium hydroxide. We call it cal activa in Spanish. And this actually changes the corn completely. It unlocks a lot of nutrients and makes them available to make it a very nutritious food, instead of hiding the nutrients and keeping them less bioavailable. And it softened the hull of the corn to be able to make dough and masa and turn them into these very flexible tortillas we as Mexicans can't live without. So very different drinks. Tejuino on the right side is a very low alcohol drink, sometimes 0.4, 0.5 ABV. It's actually usually served with like a lemon sorbet in a glass. It's a summer drink full of ice and fruit. It's sweetened. And tejuino on the left side is higher in alcohol. It's actually from a malted product that demands filtering, boiling, and many of the processes we use in beer today. And it involves not only yeasts, but also a lot of bacteria. So it was kind of a funky, sour, and bitter to balance drink, which still amazes me today, because they're still doing it the old school way. And on the right side, you see pozol, which is also made from dough, more common in regions like Tabasco or the Yucatan Peninsula. And actually, it was also a protein boost to keep the stomach full for long working periods in the fields and in the very, very, very hot weather of the peninsula. So I think it's pretty amazing, all the pre-Hispanic drinks. We could spend like an hour talking about them, but we don't have that much time, and it is a beer talk. So I just wanted to put in context that ferments were nothing new for Mexicans. If you visit the Instituto Nacional de Antropología y Historia, the INA Museum in Mexico City, which I highly recommend, you will find things like this. You can see corn was such a big part of many pre-Hispanic cultures in Mexico, and you'll feel a little more what corn means to us. So just as a checklist, maize and rice have two valid roles. You can use them as a technical choice, but you can also use them for culture and acknowledgement behind the word Mexican in your beer. Its heritage, its biodiversity, its identity. You can also use rice. You don't even have to use corn, as long as you hit your sensory targets, as we'll talk in a little while. But just think about maize, because it's culturally unique for us. Okay, so then the present, no? Which will take us back to Jacob doing this. But first, I want to say Mexican culture is pretty famous around the world. Any country I traveled to, eventually I found this Mexican restaurant or joint or taco place, which is full of happy people to see Mexican food there. So it's pretty commercially powerful. It's globally influential. We have one of the very few cuisines recognized as a World Heritage cuisine, because it links these ancient traditions to the present. So our focus in this talk is to try to inspire more authenticity, also demand a pristine technical execution process behind it, because it's also beer and we need to make good beer, no? And just treat everything you do with respect if you're going to use the word Mexican, no? We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. But I think Mexican lagers just fall into this modern intersection that is actually very very easy to make popular today. It's an approachable style. It doesn't demand a lot of learning the complexities behind beer to appreciate them, but they can also have character and identity, as we just talked. So again, craft breweries, you usually see at least a Mexican lager in a lot of tap rooms you're going to visit today. You're going to see light Mexican lagers, pale Mexican lagers, or claras, like they usually called in Mexico. And then we fall into the oscuras realm, where amber and dark beers are just like intertwined into this blurry line that in Mexico we call oscuras. Industrially, most oscura beers in our industry have always been amber, more of a Vienna lager kind of appearance, and we call them oscuras. So, in the purpose of also educating, uh, even though industry is not always interested in educating that much, we do want to show people the difference between a dark beer and an amber beer. So again, competitive presence just reinforces the style's legitimacy, but that doesn't mean we have to settle for what's already been shown by the industry. So I think the craft adoption made a huge step towards making people proud of the style and not just complain about this industrial gimmicky style just being in the guidelines. I think we need a little more understanding behind it. So I'm going to tell you about what really excites us is Mexican lagers are now in the Brewers Association guideline. It is what you call now today a real style. It's being repeated, and now you can actually see a guideline that defines it. And a lot of people don't know this, but actually, this idea kind of comes from Mexican heads too. So, first of all, thanks to the Brewers Association for really taking into consideration that it is a real category. But I'm going to tell you a little bit of how this started. This started actually in Colombia, in Medellin. We started talking about what could be a Mexican style, chile, cacao. There's so many ingredients, but making it international available and making it actually a recognized international style is just too much of a challenge if you make it too folkloric or too colorful. So we then realized Mexican lagers were already being brewed. This evolved into many meetings, research, and eventually submission and drafting of the style. Of course, it wasn't a bad idea because in its debut, it had over 148 entries at the GABF, which is the biggest national beer competition in the US and probably the second biggest competition in the world. And it was also a main category at the World Beer Cup this year. Two of the sub styles actually made its own category, which is amazing considering the amount of classic styles in the guidelines. So we're very thankful for the response of brewers around the world with this being an official style. No more Mexican lagers being sold as Mexican lagers and entered as cream ales in the competitions. So a lot of brewers were pretty happy about that. And this is the four styles that were defined and recognized by the BA: light lagers, pale lagers, amber lagers, and dark lagers. There was also a proposal by some of the people that helped develop all of this, to just call them claras and oscuras. But we decided that it would be a great opportunity to actually show people that you can have actually a pitch black Mexican dark lager and a light amber Mexican amber lager, and they shouldn't be together in the same category because we also want to educate. So you can nowadays, we're not going to go through the whole guidelines because we have a lot of things to talk about, but you can visit the BA's guidelines, the latest update of the guidelines, and you will see all the stats and all the description behind it. But we are going to show you a few very successful examples, like this Kayako from Cervecería de Colima, which is actually a World Beer Cup medal winner. Not the Kayako maize itself, but the brewery with other lagers. So Mexican style light lager, pretty much the same differences between American light lager and American lager, you can find them between Mexican style light lager and Mexican style pale lager. But in general, I like how when we were starting researching, Jacob defined the Mexican lagerness. You feel like this kind of fullness of flavor and grain in the mouth that crashes so fast into this drinkable dry finish in the beer. So it's not all the experience is that low. You get like this roller coaster of flavor, and that I think that's what defines Mexican lager. We want flavor because we're a culture that actually enjoys a lot of flavor, but again, we want this super high drinkability. Even in the styles like the amber lager or the dark lager, we also see some cool examples. Uh, you can have complexity from specialty grains or from whatever gave the color to your beer, but those have to be like really thin layers of complexity that don't mess up with the high drinkability finish you demand from a Mexican lager. So I think that's pretty much what defines the styles. And I'm going to talk about another sub style we're trying to propose for the future when we reach the future part of the talk. So just for judges out here watching the talk today, it needs to be a brilliantly clear beer, crisp with a dry finish. This grain sweetness, again, this kind of fullness in the palate that goes straight to the crisp, dry finish experience of the beer. Very smooth, very super clean fermented. A lot of people think it must be a very sulfury beer, but actually Nacho is going to tell us a lot about the fermentation profile, and it's actually a very, very, very clean fermented beer. And again, just talking quickly, our friend Eduardo Arce, Cheche, he has a brewery in Ensenada, and he organizes one of the oldest, most famous competitions in Mexico, the Copa Cervecera del Pacífico, around the Ensenada Beer Fest. Actually did a blind tasting between industrial Mexican lagers and lagers from the US, American lagers. And out of 10 beers, 9 beers were identified by almost the whole panel. And the panel were only judges and brewers. They were like service industry people, just beer drinkers, a chemist. There were many people involved, and they could pretty much all tell the difference between this is American, this is Mexican, this is American. So even though we go back to the Spider-Man meme, there's actually a perceivable difference in how these two adjunct lagers evolved. So the identity is real, even when beers are clean, and the differences are very subtle. So I invite you all to visit the guidelines and check out all the details behind them. These are some of the case studies we actually presented, and I'm going to throw the mic to Jacob here because actually one of his beers is in the case studies we're proposing. So all yours, Jacob.
Yeah. So I think it's important to acknowledge that what comes first before anything else is that you're hitting the sensory expectations. So it is possible, and people have brewed Mexican style lagers without the use of corn or rice. However, I think that as we know it today, it feels odd not using corn or rice in a Mexican lager. Craft brewers have identified the use of corn in Mexican lagers because essentially we were kind of retro engineering a commercialized style. It's not like, German Helles or German Pils, where these styles are so rooted in tradition that we can still taste traditional, modern interpretations of very traditional styles by the originators of the style. So yes, you're going to see rice and corn used in a lot of these Mexican lagers. So I think that's pretty cool just to acknowledge that again. Like we're retro engineering a commercial style versus creating a style, but moving the style forward. I think we have a lot of opportunities to improve and to take some really big creative leaps and bounds. So I think a lot of us have tried some of these industrial versions: Bohemia, Negro Modelo, Victoria, Mexican Craft, Paracarista, Hercules, Golima. Those are some really great Mexican lagers made in Mexico. And then you've got some U.S. craft interpretations, which is one of our flagship lagers, Mexico Calling, which originally, and the versions at the pub, is still brewed without any corn, but it surprises absolutely everybody, but it meets the sensory expectations, and I think that's like really, really important. We do have that beer brewed at a much larger facility where we do use corn. And to be honest, there's really not a whole lot of difference between the two from a sensory perspective. So I think that's been really cool. L. Smith, 21st Amendment. We've got a lot of really great American versions of these Mexican lagers. Oscar Blues. A lot of these beers have probably meddled in the cream ale category. I think like Sully in the past has. So it's just kind of funny to see that used to kind of be the catch-all category for anything with corn and pale. So technical execution, we're going to kind of start getting into the nuts and bolts of recipe development. Grain bill and adjunct management. So you want enough corn for it to contribute some identity and character without it overwhelming the beer. So we start with about between 10 and 40. 40 is going to be a pretty heavy-handed with corn, but knowing your ingredients, if you're going to be using, some locally produced or heirloom corns, you might want to use less than that or more than that. So it's just really knowing your ingredients. I am a firm believer in using very high quality Pilsner malt or pale malt. I think this goes an incredibly long way at providing that kind of fullness while still being quenching and finishing strong, or not strong, but quenching without any sort of lingering flavor. So I've been a huge proponent for quality Pilsner because this is a very clean and simple beer. So you really want probably pretty much the best malt you can have. Optional Vienna or specialty malts. I personally like using Vienna in paler Mexican lagers. However, know your Vienna malt because, for instance, we have an American maltster Breeze up in Wisconsin that makes probably the palest Vienna that you can find. And then you go and you look at Wireman, which is a little bit darker if you use it at 100%. You can go all the way up to Gambrinus, which is a really high quality Vienna malt. However, it is very dark, almost putting you at something like 15, 16 SRMs for your finishing color. So knowing your Vienna malt is really important. For darker styles, high quality, I have to articulate this. I like using higher percentages of color malt than just using a small amount for color adjustment, unless you start talking about really, really, really dark beers. But yeah, I think that if you want to stay even in that amber lager territory, you can achieve that with a split of high quality Pilsner malt and Vienna malt, depending on where you're getting your Vienna from. So again, high quality stuff is of at most importance. Brewing with maize or corn, reduce protein. So we're going to get better clarity, better filtration, whether you're centrifuging or passing through filters, higher attenuation in most cases. It does contribute a subtle sweetness to the neutral base, so I think it helps support the balance. And again, we always come back to these beers being drinkable by design. And that's, pretty important. So now we start talking about corn. And this is a pretty interesting section, and it's the section that I have the most experience with when working with this style, is that there is no corn that is exactly alike, because there's so many different ways to use it. And I think what we're all going to be most familiar with is using flaked or rolled or pre-gelatinized corn, because one, it is highly available, readily available. Especially here in America. I'm not sure how readily available it is in Europe, but it is generally a distributor item. So yeah, it's pretty common. It is highly convertible by your base malts, used at even up to 40%. So just for mini diastatic power from your base malt. So it is very easy to convert. And again, it kind of supports that sweetness and that neutral base. And it's a really great option to use. However, there's a lot of different kinds of corn. This is where I think some of us have the opportunity to really start exploring corn being a huge crop in the Midwest. There's a lot of farmers growing different varietals of corn. I know that we purchase a lot of our corn from a maltster out in Indiana called Sugar Creek, and he's growing American red corns, and he's growing Oaxacan green corns and Peruvian corns, all for distilling and brewing. So they all have their own particular flavor, but dried corn is probably going to be the easiest to find. However, it comes with some pretty great challenges in the brew house. It requires a lot of equipment that a lot of us don't have. And I'll back up to the flaked and rolled corn. Going back to equipment, this is what you would use in your standard single infusion mashes or step mashes. However, when we go back to using raw corn, it requires special mills. It requires a cereal cooker, which a lot of us don't have access to or even use. And that's, pumps designed for circulating or vessels with mixers, basically specially designed for the cook of corn. And a lot of us just in smaller brew houses just don't have the access to that. So, but where its strength is that flavor, aroma, color, those are all going to be variety dependent, and it's worth exploring if you can, if you have the ability to use some of these specific kinds of corn. But again, grinding and using it in single infusion, you're not going to really access any of its starches for conversion. It's a pretty hard grain, and also passing corn through a regular 2-roller or 3-molar mill is a really terrible idea, because those kernels can be really large. So this is another version of, or variety, or not version, another kind of corn that I've actually been using quite a lot in the brew house, and corn grits. So you can get corn grits commercially pretty easy. Our maltster has a corn grits mill on farm. So he actually takes all of his different varietals of corn and will pass it through his corn grits mill. This kind of opens up some possibilities for people with smaller brew houses, such as myself. We have a 10-barrel brew house. You don't really need any kind of specialty equipment like you would using whole raw corn. This is an opportunity to build some relationships with growers of corn and millers. I know that sometimes there's a pretty big resurgence in millers and people making heirloom flours and things like that, and a lot of them have mills that are able to make corn grits. So you could essentially buy corn from anywhere in the world and have a miller do that for you. The way that the corn is milled through the grits mill is that it it removes the germ that contains a lot of the foam negative oils. So you'll get a really nice clean output from your fermentation. You get good extract. However, so this is the way that we've been using it, is that we've actually been doing a step cook in our brew kettle. We don't have a mixer in our brew kettle, so we'll throw about 100, 150 pounds of grits in our brew kettle. We'll circulate our brew kettle, and the grits are ground fine enough to pass through the pump without jamming it. And with that, we can do a step cook, and we'll add about 20% its weight in 2-row to help it convert. And then we'll start slow and kind of ramp up to a sack rest, and then we'll ramp up to a full cook. And then we take that grits cook, and then we'll transfer it over into the mash tun as we're mashing in, and use it as part of our grist. So it's kind of isolating the corn, cooking the corn, sending it over into our mash tun. And with this, we've gotten amazing results. We get incredible extraction. We get a great dry finish. And we get that really nice kind of subtle sweetness that we're all that associate with the style. And again, this is really cool because, especially in America, that there's corn growers everywhere. So you can build these relationships between, whoever's growing the corn and whoever who can mill the corn, and you can unlock a really large amount of potential with that. And then the last one is malted corn. We use a lot of malted corn too. Malted corn is a lot more challenging, and those are, it's not challenging for the brewers to use. It's challenging for the maltsters, because I know that it malts at an incredibly higher humidity than normal barley. It malts at a higher temperature, and it takes longer to malt. So you don't see a lot of craft maltsters doing them, but there are regionally some that will. I know that Sugar Creek, they do it twice a year, and they just try to do as much as they can because it causes some disruptions in their normal malt house. The malted corn itself has no diastatic power, so you really need to depend on your base malt for conversion. And with that, extract is going to vary wildly between malted corn, and a lot of that is because is crush dependent. I know that with a single infusion mash, you have to grind it pretty coarse, or else it'll jam up your mash. But if you grind it coarsely, then your extract's not going to be great. I've seen extract anywhere from 40% all the way up to 75, 78%. So it will lend fermentable sugars. However, that's going to be really dependent on how well it's modified by your maltster. However, I find that it brings the strongest varietal flavor to your beer, because I kind of think about it as it's a lot more kind of minimal intervention, in that it's being germinated and gently germinated and kilned. And, we're treating it pretty gently in the mash by not, boiling it or cooking it. So I get the most expression from a malted corn. It's possible that if you have a maltster that's local that doesn't grow corn, that you can, secure the corn yourself and have him or them malt it. So, there's a lot of possibilities here if you really want to start exploring corn. And that's kind of what we hope for the style, is that we really want to push it forward by exploring corn in a way that, respects the heritage of Mexico a lot more. And, using flaked corn is completely okay, and we still do it for some of our beers. We brew a Texas Bock where we used flaked corn, but for certain beers, I think when you really want to showcase the corn, and this is a really good option to do it. And yeah, so these are some examples of some red corn. We in the Midwest we have a lot of Bloody Butcher, which also grows around the Appalachia region. Maybe this is persuasion, but I've always thought of the Bloody Butcher Red to be spicy and kind of black peppery. I've had whiskeys distilled from 100% Bloody Butcher Red corn, and it comes through pretty predominantly as black pepper and spice. When using this red corn at really high percentages, it lends a pretty nice kind of ruby tone to your beer. So we've used it in an American lager at 70% malted red corn, and it lent a really beautiful amber color to the beer that is a lot unlike kilned or light crystal malts. White and yellow dent corn is kind of what we're going to be most familiar with, and I think that lends the most typical flavor, being sweet, creamy in texture. And I should back up. Malted corn actually contributes a fair amount of body and texture. So we talk about raw corn, flaked corn, corn grits as adding lightness to the body. I find that malted corn actually adds a considerable amount of weight, not necessarily pushing it into like a dextrin or high protein malt, but it adds a lot more than you would anticipate. We've brewed some beers using 100% malted corn, and there's a considerable amount of body and texture to it, despite some of the other versions of corn. Oaxacan green corn is something that we use a lot in our Mexican lagers, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But I've always felt it to be have that much more richer of flavor, full-bodied, and then you can. We have a maltster that makes Peruvian Morado corn, which is at high percentages is incredibly purple. So yeah, so corn, heirloom corn has an incredible amount of range, and we're just kind of scratching the surface here. So it's cool to know that there's a lot of intention that can go behind your corn selection if you have the ability to do so. Oh, and then I think I'm going to pass that over to Nacho because he's going to talk about some risks. Or was I going to do this? Yeah, he
No,
was going to talk about what's that?
yeah, no, that's a part of the fermentation. So I'm going to take over on to review fermentation aspects of Mexican lagers. And by the way, Alex, we figured it out, and I'm able to control the slides now. So
Oh, perfect.
I'll,
Okay.
I'll
Well,
I'll take it from here.
okay, cool.
So when using adjuncts, there are some risks that you can find upstream and fermentation, and especially when we're talking about corn and rice, because when we're using them in enough quantity, what we're doing is we're diluting the nutritional content of the wort in comparison to all malt. And I'm particularly going to be talking about nitrogen or fan, as you see in the slides. But that could even be the case for other nutrients, like minerals and vitamins. But the thing is that when we use a high enough quantity of adjuncts and the concentration of amino acids or nitrogen is diluted enough, the yeast might experience some problems. In particular, we might have some sulfur compounds like hydrogen sulfide or sulfur dioxide, or we might even have the risk of a higher amount of diacetyl, which are flavors you want to keep very low or absent in Mexican lagers. The reason for this is that when the yeast does not have enough amino acids in the wort, they start producing their own amino acids, and that's when these compounds that I mentioned, sulfur compounds and diacetyl, are produced in higher quantities. And if the amino acids are low enough, in a more extreme case, the fermentation might even stop before getting to terminal gravity. So when we're brewing with adjuncts, we might need to consider the use of a yeast nutrient. And Also, to consider that not all yeast nutrients do the same. There are some yeast nutrients in the market, for example, our own Cervomyces. They will only contribute with zinc. And zinc, there's people saying that a zinc addition is helpful in any beer. However, zinc alone will not fix a nitrogen deficient wort. So you need to consider that you might need a nutrient that has supplementary nitrogen for your beer with adjuncts. Uh, I know some breweries that use these nutrients as a cautionary measure, like they know they're doing a beer with adjuncts, so they will just pick up an arbitrary amount of yeast nutrient, and that might work for them. I know some other breweries that have used them as a caution, as a reactionary measure, that they made a beer with adjuncts and they had some problems and they raise a complaint to the yeast supplier, of course, and then by the next time they use an adjunct, I'm sorry, yeast nutrient, again arbitrary amount, and that might fix the problem. However, well, and I also know breweries that have done beers with adjuncts for a long, long time, and they say they never needed a yeast nutrient, and that might be fine as well. So there's a way to optimize this. And changing slides. There's a couple of methods that you can use to make sure that you're only adding the amount of nutrient that your fermentation needs. Here, for example, a common target for lager yeast is around 165 ppm of FAN, or yeast assimilable nitrogen. This might vary a little bit between yeast strain to yeast strain, but this is already on the safe side. No, it contains a bit of a caution. So some things that you can do is to measure exactly the amount of nitrogen that is in your wort. I'm changing slides quickly. So both the ASBC and the EBC, they have methods for you to do that, to precisely measure the nitrogen that you have. And then using the specifications of the yeast nutrient that you're using, you can simply add exactly the amount that you need. Uh, this will be like what a bigger brewery will do, because these methods require the use of a spectrophotometer, which is a sophisticated piece of equipment. Most craft breweries, they wouldn't have access to this um, equipment. But what a small craft brewery can do is to do another test that kind of circles around the issue, which will be to do lab scale fermentations like the one on the right picture. So this method is, it's budget friendly, it's labor intensive, but you only need basic lab supplies and of course a trained staff. But here, what you can do is to, in different flasks like this. And by the way, this is an idea that a brewer from a big craft brewery in Mexico told me. Works very similar to like optimization tests for process aids, in case you've done them. But here in the flask, you just pour an equal amount of wort on each flask. Obviously, you pitch your yeast, you use your airlocks, but then at each different flask, you would add nutrients at a different dose. And then you measure the fermentation, you measure the kinetics of the fermentation, and assess each flask for off flavors. And then you will want to use that yeast nutrient dose that, first of all, finish the fermentation in a satisfactory time that is free from off flavors, but you also want to use the dose that is the lowest of those, right? You don't want to add too much nutrient. First of all, an excess of nitrogen can also be detrimental for the beer, because it can cause some stability issues. And second, it's an expense, and obviously, if you can keep expenses down, it's going to be better for your brewery. And so, yeah, just circling back, this will be like I know, labor intensive alternative, but it's budget friendly. In terms of the, I'm switching now to the fermentation profile. What to expect for fermentation in Mexican lagers? So really, what we want is usually a pretty clean, not very complex fermentation. We do want to get a high attenuation. I mean, the use of adjuncts might help in this, but remember that drinkability is part of the staples, as Alex said, part of the staple of Mexican lager. So even though we want some kind of palate fullness, a high attenuation is key. We've we have been reaching out to yeast companies that have a Mexican lager in the market, and for example, Omega Yeast, Laura Burns, who works there, let us know some of the ester profile that they have seen with their strain of Mexican lagers. And something that they found is that it tends to be pretty clean in terms of esters, but it does produce a little bit higher isoamyl acetate in comparison to other lager yeast strains. And which for me, we've talked about how American and Mexican lagers appear to be pretty similar in the surface. But for me, the ester profile is one of the key differences. Like American lager yeast will usually provide a bit of like an apple character in terms of their ester profiles. The Mexican lager yeast in the market will tend to produce just a different type of ester profile. No, it's more leaning into the isoamyl acetate. Obviously, not enough to be in the range of a Weissbier or a Banana Bomb. It's only background levels, but again, those, even if it's low levels, it's just enough to cause a bit of a sensory impact. Other than that, you want a clean fermentation profile. Also, from Omega, they told us that among their lager strains, the Mexican lager is the one that produces the least amount of sulfur, which for me it's pretty cool because it kind of shows how the yeast has been adapting to wort with adjuncts and low nitrogen, and how brewers have been selecting it to perform well in those worts with a relatively lower amount of nutrients. So you really want not necessarily complexity. What you want is to be just very disciplined and provide an elegant, clean fermentation profile. So just a little bit of a checklist of what you need if you're brewing a Mexican lager. Just consider that you might need a nutrient with nitrogen. Pitch rate, obviously, you want to use a proper lager pitch rate. Sometimes a very common mistake for brewers that are starting to make lagers is to not get a pitch rate quite right. Obviously, temperature, ferment on the temperature recommended for your yeast strain in particular, and make sure that your beer at the end is free of diacetyl notes. In terms of the yeast identity, or what we know about the Mexican lager yeast strains, do you know, or what makes a lager yeast Mexican? This is for me a pretty cool topic because, well, first of all, we don't have a lot of information available. There's a great opportunity to learn more about uh, how the Mexican lager yeast strains have been evolving over time and how different they are to other lager strains. So, what we've been able to find out. First of all, there are some brewing magazines from the late 1800s and early 1900s. Some of them have some references that a very popular yeast supplier for the early Mexican breweries was the Wallhenius Institute in Chicago. And from that, we kind of can make a bit of an assumption here, but we think that might be reason to think that the yeast that now is a Mexican lager yeast, it probably got to Mexico from the US instead of directly from Europe, right? However, here at Lalemant, well, not here at my home, but at Lalemant, we've done genetic analysis to some of the Mexican lager yeast strains on the market, and genetically they seem to be really, really similar to German lager yeast strains, in particular like the Tum 3470 yeast strains, like if you're familiar with our Diamond, for example. So genetically they're pretty similar to that. Which also it makes sense because you see a lot of breweries making Mexican lagers with those family of lager yeast strains. So first of all, I would say that you don't necessarily need to use a Mexican lager yeast strain to make a Mexican lager beer. I wouldn't say it's completely a requirement. In since you see this genetic close, relatedness, it totally makes sense that a German lager yeast strain will make a good Mexican lager yeast beer as well. One of the things that some of these yeast companies that we reach out to told us, this is coming from Y Labs, they see that their Mexican lager yeast strain produces a higher amount of glycerol in the fermentation, higher than all their other lager strains, which for me it kind of also makes sense because we will be wondering how much of an impact it has on this palate fullness that we say that are very common in Mexican lager beers, and but then that also quickly snaps to dry. So will be really great to kind of look into that of how much of an impact this higher glycerol production can be. Now we've also we've looked at the descriptions of all of the Mexican energy strains that are in the market, and while I don't have confirmation of this, but I'm pretty convinced that they are all variants of the same Mexican lager strain. They're pretty similar to each other. But if you think about it, in the early 1900s, there were at least a dozen different breweries that got consolidated into the two brewing groups that operate in Mexico today. So that means that there's a Mexican yeast diversity that the market is not really tapping into, and so there's some kind of lost diversity of Mexican yeast, right? And and we know as well that in some yeast banks that hold like historical strains, for example, Stibel, and they have like a dozen Mexican lager yeast strains that they have very little information about. They pretty much only know the year that it was entered into the yeast bank and the brewery that it used to belong to. And for me, it's like a very cool opportunity to just kind of uh, look more into it to make sure how different they are to the Mexican lager strain that is in the market, and what common characteristics it could share with it and with other lager strains in general. And I'm going to let Jacob tell us a very cool story because he has played around with these
Yeah.
options.
I think that we associate a little isolamyl or sulfur with commercial Mexican lagers, but that yeast is put under a lot of pressure, and so I think it's going to throw off some particular flavors. So as a part of our 10th anniversary, we wanted to take our house lager that we just have brewed thousands of barrels of, and I had the opportunity to use a historical Mexican lager yeast strain, and as a matter of fact, it was found by one of the Lallemand employees, and it was the original Cruz Blanca lager strain that was banked in the Siebel Doman's archive in the 1960s. It was banked with a lot of other strains, and I think it was banked as an ale strain, so we didn't really have a lot to go off of, other than maybe they just inherited a lot of yeast from a different yeast bank. But I thought it would make a really good opportunity to explore, considering we could use it in our 10th anniversary lager. So We were able to work with Lalaman. Lalaman ran some quick testing on it just to determine if it really was an ale strain, but we had a feeling it was a lager strain because the original Cruz Blanca was a lager brewery. Turned out it was a lager strain. We were able to send slants to Escarpment in Canada, and they propped it up. While they were propping, they did additionally run some testing, and it turned out to be a phenolic off-flavor strain, which was, it's kind of funny because it doesn't present itself until it does, you know. But anyway, we were able to brew with it. The first generation, we were really quite impressed by the flavor because, however, it wasn't as strong of a fermenter as the Mexican lager yeast that we've used at Omega or Diamond. But it had some great promise. We ended up getting about 8 generations in, and only until about the 8th generation did it actually start producing some phenolic off flavors. So upon great stress, I think it started to give off a lot of isolamyl, which isn't terribly out of place, but it was not as clean as its previous batches. But this is all part of the exploration of these archived yeasts, and I thought it was really fun to bring something alive that probably has not been brewed with in 50 years or plus. So, you know, you have relationships with your yeast suppliers. There's odds that maybe they have some really cool Mexican lager yeasts banked, and if you're willing to take the risk, I think it's high risk, high reward. It's a really amazing story to tell and to be a part of. And to be honest, we brewed everything from our house lager to a really textbook Maíz Odyssey, which is a beer we're going to talk about in a little bit that we did in collaboration with Alex and Ignacio, that with Oaxacan green corn. It was incredibly well suited for that beer. Despite it not being as strong of an attenuator, we were getting anywhere from 76 to about 79% apparent attenuation, which with using Diamond or Omega Mexican Lager, we were seeing north of 80. So still good performance, not as strong as the others, but it still has this perception of dryness. But yeah, it's just a really cool experiment. Yeah, and sees just some pictures of our 10th anniversary collab. Escarpment, yeah, they were able to do some preliminary testing and found out that it was a phenolic off flavor producer. But again, given the right stressors, it produced off flavors. The previous batches were brilliantly clean. So you know, just an observation, you know, and now that, you know, we found out that it works and we like it so much, there's a lot of possibilities for further exploration and some more genetic, you know, testing into these strains possibly. Hops, last but not least, hops. I think hops are there basically just to support, but not dominate. I prefer, and the style prefers these. Sorry, there's a fire truck going by. These styles prefer low alpha acid European or normal noble type hops. So Saaz, Hallertauer, Tettnang, Styrian. I would avoid any sort of modern citrus or tropical hops with high alpha acid. You want to hit this really nice soft target that presents balance to the outcome of the beer without contributing any sort of strong character or flavor. So looking back at all those BJC guidelines, we're looking anywhere from 8 to, you know, or I think it was like 10 IBUs to 18 IBUs for some of the lighter styles, or maybe even less. And then, you know, gradually as you go up into the darker, you up your IBUs a little bit, but these things were never over 20 IBUs. They should stay pretty low. My target is always between 10 and 12. So yeah, just enough IBUs to kind of keep things balanced, but to kind of let the malt and the yeast fermentation really do the heavy lifting. Yeah, so 10 to 28. I never add any. I'll do a really small first wort addition as opposed to a bittering addition at 60 or however long you boil, but that's a personal preference. And I'll add just the ever so slightest amount of whirlpool additions, but again, there's not a really heavy amount of hop character coming from either end of those additions. Water profile, as far as I've known, we're looking for just a pretty typical water. There's nothing that separates it, as far as we know, that from any sort of that separates the water from anything in particular. I know that, there's styles that are renowned for their softness or for their hardness, but I think we're just looking for just really clean quality water, balanced chloride and sulfate ratio, and yeah. And actually, one thing we didn't really cover on this is pH. Finishing pH is something that we took a really hard look at, and we had commercial samples finishing at 3.9 and 4. We have craft examples all the way up to 4.4, so it's a pretty wide range. So it should be a supportive but not a driving component as well. But it's something to toy around with. I like adding a small amount of lactic acid in the kettle just to drop the pH to about 4.2, and I think it does an incredible job at pushing sweetness without getting any sort of actual acidic character on the palate. But future, pass it off to Alex.
Oh, that was amazing, guys. Yes, I think that pH thing is one of the things we found out when we started doing research, and Nacho was really getting into finding an optimal pH range, and what we found is so many things around the pH in a Mexican lager. Actually, there's no like specific smaller range used. Some craft breweries went pretty much 4 or 5 points above other industrial brewers we measured or researched. So again, as long as you hit your sensory targets, like Jacob said earlier, I think you're fine. You're doing a good Mexican lager. I think the glycerol part Nacho talked about is very important too, because usually glycerol, polyalcohols, polyols are not something that's measured in gravity or in regular beer analysis brew sheets, but it's more in wine. In the wine world, polyalcohols play a more important role, but it actually contributes so much to texture and fullness. So that fullness we're trying to keep as a differentiating item for other international pale lagers. Well, maybe there's a whole research possibility behind, and maybe polyalcohols actually play an important role of it. So coming back to a concept Jacob said, varietal flavor. He was talking about all these corn formats, and I love the expression varietal flavor, because as Mexicans, corn, there's so many different kinds of corn, and they all actually taste different and work different, and everybody's proud of the varieties in their own region. Actually, when we talk about, I'm actually jealous as a Mexican brewer, because you guys actually have maltsters brewing, not brewing, malting and creating products for the breweries from heirloom Mexican corns or heirloom whatever origin corn. So talking about the future, we really want to inspire people to use corn, even if it's not Mexican origin, like a local variety of corn, and thinking about making a Mexican lager. That's what we try to inspire. Even though it's not a Mexican corn, the way of growing corn was pretty much created by our pre-Hispanic cultures. So I think there's a big potential of even like a terroir kind of future for the category, because right now, if you add this complexity Jacob talked us through of spicy notes, maybe a little more flowery notes, most judging in the categories that currently exist will tell you, hey, you use too much corn, too much complexity in there. But I think it would be really cool to actually showcase this corn complexity. Well, first of all, a little spoiler for the future. We are actually working on a guide, both in the US with the help of Jacob and in Mexico. Nacho, me, and another brewer in Mexico, in a guide that actually can tell brewers which varietals of corn we can find, especially the most available ones, and what they can contribute to a beer. Again, layers of complexity without losing the staple drinkability. I think that's the main focus on it. So let's hope we hurry up with that guide. It will take us a while because we have to do like a gazillion test batches to be able to properly document everything, but we are working on it, and we do see this category in the future becoming something a little more than a highly drinkable lager, and I think that's very amazing. So let's talk about another concept quickly: the appropriation and cultural respect. I've gotten a lot of, you think my lager then, if I just put a sombrero and some maracas in the can, am I being offensive? And to be honest, guys, Mexicans, we love dark humor. We make fun of ourselves all the time. We will never get offended by a stereotypical image. But I think as brewers, we always want to step away from the stereotypes and general based knowledge that doesn't run deeply through all the possibilities we're trying to communicate. So again, no Mexican will ever get offended by a gimmicky, stereotypical Mexican lager. If you can use a specific American hop and still hit the sensory targets, do it. That it's not like a purity test. We're gonna say the purity testing again, but I would suggest to avoid all the shortcuts to make your lager Mexican. No lime, because there's no fruit involved in Mexican lagers. There's no fruits. There's no agave. There's nothing but what we said. So avoid the shortcuts. Avoid the caricature, the sombrero, the maracas. We're actually proud of sombreros and maracas, but I think that's a very general way of seeing our culture, and we can dig a little deeper. Mexican lager is a brewing tradition with real roots, as we just talked for over an hour. So our goal is to inspire brewers to communicate their beers with more authenticity, and maybe rethinking what can I do to make the Mexican part of my lager a little more authentic, a little more culturally deep and profound, and communicate it the right way. No, because again, nobody will get offended, and if you hit your sensory targets, you can even avoid the use of corn, like Jacob said. But again, I think you're missing out on a big opportunity for researchers for trying yeast strains. Like, I think Jacob's story is just wonderful. Having a Cruz Blanca isolated industrial yeast found in a yeast bank unused, and having a craft Cruz Blanca in Chicago taking that yeast and making a Mexican lager out of it, I think it's just amazing. When it comes to corn, also remember, even though you have available corns, when it comes to Mexico, and that's what makes this guide we're working at so hard, like Oaxacan green corn is not a varietal of corn. There's many corns in Oaxaca, and the same species of corn can actually have an array of color just depending on what part of the mountain it's grown or the microclimate involved. So there's so many strains of corn divided by so many things in Mexico. But again, if you have a corn that's whatever origin from Oaxaca or from wherever, that's actually a heirloom and it proposes something else that the regular products we see industrially available, I would approach my local maltster, my local mill, try to create these connections Jacob talked about, and I think that will open a big possibility of having really cool things in your beers, and still having a very highly sellable and drinkable product, which is what Mexican beer is all about. So create those partnerships, look for those colors. We've received a lot of good input from brewers about sometimes we're actually looking into it because sometimes the color from the corn affects the wort, but just evaporates after fermentation and then it becomes a blonde beer again. There's a lot of research behind that. I think we can actually achieve to take this style to a very cool place. And talking about binational collaboration, I think craft brewers in Mexico and the States joining forces to create Mexican lagers, it's the best of what we can do. Not only in the US, in many countries, we've received some examples of these beers being brewed in Barcelona, in Asia, in Poland, and South America, asking, hey, I have this corn in my town and I want to use it. Or a brewer from Ecuador using a very deep purple corn from Ecuador to create a Mexican dark lager. So adding the color not with the specialty malts, but with the corn itself. I think it's wonderful. So I really see this style evolving into maybe what we're proposing, which is a sub style of exclusively heirloom corns used in the beer. A sort of terroir beer we want to take this category to, where if you have complexity, it won't be judged as enough flavor, but as a great layer of awesomeness that you got from a agricultural product with so much history. So let's hope we can take it there. And like Jacob did with his anniversary brew, we like preaching with the example. So this is the beer we brewed actually for the CBC with around 30%. Well, Jacob will tell us all about the brewing of the beer. We made a recipe with several meetings between the three of us, and also Ryan from South Norte, which was originally a part of our panel, and then he had to take care of beer and couldn't make it. But we talked about the recipe between all of us, and we created this great beer we're really proud of. Many brewers tried it, and many judges tried it, and they could see the complexity behind the beer. But again, if you put it in a lot of competitions worldwide, they will tell you, "Oh, you use too much corn," and everything we're trying to showcase doesn't fit the right kind of style right now. So we hope we can inspire the world to acknowledge this future maybe sub style where heirloom corn is the star of the show. So Jacob, why don't you tell us a little bit about our Maize Odyssey? I think your mic's muted.
We wanted to stick to the stylistic guidelines in terms of its output. You know, it's IBUs, gravities, color, but we wanted to kind of take liberties with where we want to see the future going. And again, it was implementing that kind of cereal cook on the corn grits in our brew kettle, which I'd never done before. And it was just, I know that other breweries have done it for their American lager, so I wanted to give it a try, and it worked out great. And we also brewed it with some malted green corn. The green corn was actually it's like a Oaxacan seed grown here in Indiana, so it is of of Mexican lineage. Yeah, and it just turned out really great. Sticking strictly to the styles, however, having fun with corn, it just added an extreme amount of dimension to a very easy drinking beer. So I think it represented the style well and where it can go.
So whoever has the chance of going to Cruz Blanca and try it, I think You're about to release like the third batch already
Yeah,
of it.
we're going through it at a really fast rate. So it's been super popular. So yeah, we'll have it on probably through the fall. So
Amazing.
yeah,
So
it's doing well. It's some we want to keep it around. It's been amazing.
perfect. So just as a final conclusion, no, we're not invalidating any Mexican lager that was ever brewed. We are thankful for them because that opened the stage for even researching what was behind it. Because even in Mexico, we weren't sure what a Mexican lager was before craft brewers in the States actually started brewing it. So thanks for inspiring us, and thanks for getting some Mexican hands into the Mexican lagers too. And honestly, all the brewers from the US have been so amazing in their questions, and now they're sourcing corns, and we've been approached by maltsters that want to create some links with Mexican corn or corns wherever in their area to start creating all these available products for hopefully very interesting brews in the future. We're also not claiming if you use flakes available in your homebrew store or your ingredient supply company, that's not a Mexican lager. I mean, again, it's not a purity test if you want to use whatever you want and you can hit the sensory targets involved, then it's good. We need this kind of fullness. We need this like immediate dry finish for the palate, and we want people to immediately after one pint crave another one. That's I think what defines the caguamas. No, in Mexico we call it the caguama banquetera, the 32 or 40 ounce big bottles. And banquetera is it's just the sidewalk, no, sitting in the streets with the friends and sharing a big ass bottle of beer. It's pretty much what defines drinkability we're talking about. So we're not saying anything is invalid, but we are inviting everybody in the research community, in the yeast community, in the maltsters, the growers, the brewers. We're inviting everybody to help us keep exploring this. Just don't lose that drinkability that we're talking about for over an hour. And well, thanks for taking this seriously because even in our country, it's proving challenging to explain to people that this is actually a thing we should be proud of and we could take it to a whole nother level in the future. So remember, not derivative is an evolving expression. It involves a lot of things. Nacho took us through all the technical mastery you need, from the brew house to the lab analysis at the end. And it's a living past. It's a living style. It's a category of styles with a past, a present, and I think a very, very brilliant future. Thanks to brewers like Jacob that are taking it very, very seriously.
So here we just have a small section of rapid answers for common questions just before going into the questions that you guys have asked us in the Q&A section. So quickly, is Mexican lager just international lager with corn? That would be probably an oversimplistic way of saying it. Maybe not entirely wrong, but as we've seen in the presentation, there are specific nuances that has a cultural background, a rich brewing history that took elements from many other brewing schools in the world, specific fermentation profile, variety of using adjuncts, also different colors. So it's I would say it's much more than just international lager with corn. Should it include lime? So if I will say if there's one thing from this presentation that you have to remember, it's this. In Mexico, when we see a person like inserting a lime wedge into their beers, that's how we know 100% that that person is a tourist. Um, it can, like, lime flavored lagers can make taste good, but there's a whole Mexican beer styles. that has nothing to do with lagers, and yeah, I will just avoid just including lime to a lager and then start calling it Mexican because it's not really a characteristic of the style. Most common brewing mistakes, I mean, from my perception at judging at competitions, I see sulfur coming around very often. Sometimes I see diacetyl. Sometimes I see I find like sweet beers, like the attenuation is not quite high as it should. I will say, in my perception, that would be the most common things. Only pale lagers, no, as we saw, it's pretty cool that in Mexico, amber and pale lager beers have been coexisting for a really, really long time, and both are really popular. So in the guidelines, we also have amber and dark Mexican lagers. Why does it resonate today? I mean, there's it's a really long story. I mean, Mexico has been for a few decades the number one beer exporter in the world, and we saw craft breweries in the U.S. starting to, as Jacob said, retro-engineer that beer style, and we started seeing it more popping up more and more frequently at tap rooms. And recently, it was added into the Brewers Association guidelines, so it's growing in popularity. And we just before answering the questions, we just got to the end of what we had ready to present. Really, thank you all for showing up. I mean, we're really excited to see the amount of people that connected to see this webinar. Here are our emails in case that you want us to reach out for any comment or question. And now we will start with a Q&A. Just a little reminder, if there might be some questions missing that we might get lost in the chat, like if you really want to see an answer to it, I would just recommend to placing it on the Q&A section. So I'm going to start reading the questions. Number one from Jessica Young. Thanks for such a great talk, Alejandro and Jacob. Can you talk a little bit about the water profile? I find it hard to accent the malt adjuncts, but keeping that crisp, dry finish. I think, Jacob, would you like to?
Yeah, I'm not a water professional, unfortunately, because Chicago has pretty excellent brewing water. But anything that's outside of the, I guess, well, I don't want to call it normal, but I think watch your water pH and alkalinity and just hardness. I think it requires a little bit of hardness, but you don't need anything that's like Burton water or extremely hard. So again, I don't know what you would consider neutral, because again, it's like, because our Chicago brewing water is pretty great. So it's kind of hard to answer that question without knowing what your water is like either. So, but yeah, I mean, if there's any sort of alkalinity or high hardness, then you're going to probably have some mashing issues. And, but that's all I can really think about. You guys got anything with water?
Yeah, I can add. Like we reach out to several breweries that have a good Mexican lager, and we try to get as many weather profiles as we could. I wouldn't say that our data set is large at all, but some of the things that we saw all around is just a balanced or relatively balanced sulfate chloride ratio. Moderate minerals, and I mean, I would be more than happy, Jessica. We have the permission of those breweries to share the weather profiles. I can send you like a couple of examples. We still haven't. We really didn't have the time to look for what the big breweries are doing, for example. But that will be also like, it will be really great to just expand the data set that we have. That, as I said, is not really very large.
I think, as you said, it is perfect. Pretty neutral water profile. Again, it's a style that demands this neutrality when it comes to a lot of aspects, because it's not a super hard, complex style that demands to take the flavor or the profile into a specific way. So I would moderate minerals and a very balanced water profile will go a long way. I'm from a place where you can only work with RO. On the other side of Jacob, who has great brewing water, we can only work with RO because our water is so hard. You can pretty much cut it with a knife. So again, just keep it in the low side of the minerality.
All right. So next question from Nate. Why the warm temp in I'm sorry, with the warm temperatures in Mexico, why lager instead of ale? I think I could. I mean, I have an idea about it, so I could take it. I think it's a combination of just market reception and like the brewing influence that was in Mexico, that was mainly European in the late 1800s, or even if we had like American brewers coming from the US that were coming from, like still European brewing schools, and like the Schneider guy that got to Monterrey. Uh, it's also very cool to find that in the late 1800s we see advertisements that there was pale ales being produced in Mexico by the same breweries that they made their all the popular lagers. However, those beers just didn't stick. The reason for that, I'm not completely sure, but I think it just has something to do with market reception, and also by the late 1800s and early 1900s, there were a few refrigeration machines in Mexico, so lager just became a possibility, and the brewers just sticked with lagers.
Lagers and ice, no? All the first breweries in Mexico were actually a beer and ice factory thing because the equipment was so expensive and so hard to get here and install it. Having ice produced in a machine was like, wow, for this weather, it just changed everything. And I think also it's not only in Mexico, no, in general in the world when that happened, like massive lager production became a staple around the world for factories. It was easier to sell, easier to mass produce, and easier to explain. So I think that plays a big role in lagers just taking over not only Mexico but the whole world.
All right. And next question from Rene Vanegas. Any special considerations for low head resistance?
I've never noticed, unless I was using a high percentage of malted corn, which malted corn does have some of the germ still attached, which does contain oil. I've used that in pretty high percentages and seen a detriment to foam stability. However, with the lower amounts and the grits cook, I've seen pretty great head retention and foam density to it. So I actually, I think they say that, the lower protein content is supposed to kind of form a more collapsible head, but I think that by the recipe design and carbonation, I think it helps, and the lightness helps keep the foam suspended. I don't know. That's a
Not to be romantic with our not to be romantic with our collab, Jacob, but Mace Odyssey actually had great retention. Like it was a very nice beer. Of course, lagers are like this are not usually like the foam stability, and it's not one of the staples of the style. But I think it has a very nice foam retention. No, what do you think?
Yeah. So, things that you can do to help increase foam is, just, I'm generally using a lower protein malt in Mexican lagers too. So it doesn't have a lot of protein, period. But again, I think if that's an issue to you, like there's Tetra is always kind of used to kind of help foam stability with macro lagers and stuff, but I haven't noticed any sort of foam issues unless I'm using high percentages of strictly malted corn.
Reach out to Laleman for foam stability products too.
Yeah, I mean the tetra hop extract is a great solution. So a question from Lebron. Noble hops were mentioned as traditional. In the States, it's very common to have a lime with Mexican lagers. Will using newer hop varieties to present late addition lime character instead of adding a lime be considered a no-no in this style?
Yeah, I
Alex?
think lime flavor in general is considered a no-no in this style. Lime, if you like it, consider it more like a cocktail. You're adding something to the finished product. But I don't think nobody. We're trying to get people to not expect lime flavor in a Mexican lager, because again, adding lime to the beer is more of a tourist thing in Mexico than something we do. We do have cocktails, but we don't call it a beer style like micheladas. When we take the lager style and then we add a bunch of stuff and spices and tajin or whatever you want to add to your michelada. But again, that's not a beer style, that's a cocktail. So I would avoid anything that involves lime flavor, because again, it's such a subtle amount of complexity layers that can be found in a Mexican lager. If you add lime, you're just gonna cover the whole thing up. So I would avoid both the lime and the lime flavored hops.
Yeah, I would say unless you're trying to be experimental, but stylistically, yeah, I would say it would be off. And next question from Garrett Hickey. Are you using Bayerman or another German Malzer or an American Malzer? So
Um, I have used Wireman. I've used it depends on what kind of Mexican lager I'm also doing, but again, I've used Breeze. I use Prairie Pills and a lot of Select Pills in a lot of our Mexican lagers. So I think it really goes down to just like knowing your malt, but there's nothing that says it has to be German pills or American pills or Canadian pills or whatever. So that's my take on it.
yeah,
Mhm.
also in
Focus on
Mexico,
focus on sensory targets. Sorry.
yeah, in Mexico we also see about everything people using American and German. I mean, including Bayerman and other malt brands. So next question from Matthias. Can you tell the optimum pitch rate you were talking about before? What is the industrial fermentation profile versus craft beer one? So the optimal pitch rate will just depend, will vary to your specific yeast strain. So it's a common target for lager to have about 1.5 to 2 million cells per milliliter per degree Plato. But there will be exceptions, and you can always fine tune the pitch rate to reach a flavor profile that you are looking for. A higher pitch rate will just decrease the esters, a lower pitch rate will increase them. Um, I mean, for example, I know like good examples of Mexican lager doing with like our Nova lager, which wouldn't be like a traditional uh, example in, but as long as you hit the sensory targets, you can use Nova lager and ferment at 20 degrees Celsius. So it's all it's not about so much about how you get there, but as long as you hit the sensory targets that we talked about, that will be optimum. So
Yes.
what is the industrial fermentation profile versus craft beer one? Uh, so I don't have too much information about the what the industrial fermentation profile and also the craft beer. It varies a lot between brewery to brewery. Typically, we hear that the industrial breweries they tend to go for a higher temperature maturation than usual, and to be able to make it shorter. I don't know exactly the details of it. I can tell you that the industrial craft breweries are measuring everything, or all the volatiles that you can measure. They have a very close control of the batches that they send out, which is obviously something that the craft breweries don't. Craft breweries, I see some, doing like a German lab maturation time, and some others that just are able to to send their Mexican ales pretty quickly. And I don't know if Jacob and Alex
And
want
again,
to.
like loved how Jacob worded. It's a retro engineered style that come from the industrial profile. So when craft brewers started doing this, they were trying to uh, do something similar. Than the only examples available were industrial. So I think the craft beer profile is still in under construction. We can all help out creating a more differentiated profile, but again, right now it's basically a way of acknowledging what happened in the evolution in the industrial profile and trying to adapt it to the realities of, like Nacho said, we can't afford chromatography or all this high-end equipment to measure exactly everything that the market research told the brew house that this is going to be sold more. This is the opinion of the people. Usually, we are a little more romantic with the process and a little less budget friendly.
Yeah, I can flip one in about 20 days. I know it sounds like it's not very romantic, but strong pitch, strong fermentation. I'll ramp up for diacetyl rest and hold it for about 5 days. I do that ramp up about 3/4 through fermentation, right before terminal, just so I can ensure it finishes strong. Again, make sure I give it a long de-rest, and then step crash it about 5 degrees every day. Let it sit cold, hit it with some biofine, give it 2 or 3 more days, and transfer it to the bright. So it's a pretty quick flip, and tastes just fine.
All right. Next question from Nate about corn variety, sweet or field corns.
They're field corns, starchy field corn. Yeah, dent corn is generally like what you'd probably most commonly refer to it as.
All right.
I've never seen anyone brew with sweet corn. Give it a shot.
Another question from Leopold. What enzymes do you use in mashing? In case of 40% of grits corn, how do you increase fan in the wort? Do you have to enhance foam during beer filtration? So first, about what enzymes do you want to take that one, Jacob?
Yeah. In the case of doing the grits corn cook, I'll add 20% of the base malt, which usually has enough to convert or to start converting the grits cook. Because of the inconsistency in using multicorn, sometimes if I'm just focusing on multicorn, I'll use an alpha amylase enzyme, definitely. Going to the CBC, there was a whole talk over brewing with corn, and it depends on where your maltster's at. Andrew Fawcett, Human Robot, was using multicorn. However, he still had to do a modified cereal mash with enzyme in order to get good extract out of it. Whereas I've used multicorn and gotten pretty good extract without the use of enzyme. So, I mean, you want to do a starch test first just to make sure, and then. But I mean, it's an exploration for sure when using some of this stuff. But yeah, I mean, especially for that grits cook, 20% by weight of 2-row or any sort of your base malt is going to be enough to convert it without the use of an enzyme. Nacho,
Yeah,
you can talk about fan.
Yeah, I can take that fan question. If you use 40% of grits, that's a pretty high percentage, I will say. And yes, it's normal to think that there might be fan issues in that wort. I mean, there's a variety of solutions. Like some breweries just will switch to high protein malt. That might do the trick, but probably the easiest solution without changing your whole recipe is to include a yeast nutrient, and look for a yeast nutrient with nitrogen. For example, at Laleman, we have two examples like Yeast Life Extra, which will be the most inexpensive nutrient that we have to raise the level of fun in lager worts with adjuncts. We also have the Yeast Life O, which it requires a higher dose rate, but when you have such a high amount of corn, it might actually end up being the solution that gives you the better results. So yeah, just play around with a yeast nutrient, and there are also obviously more yeast nutrients in the market. These are just the examples that we have. And do you have to enhance foam during beer filtration? Uh, I mean, if you are seeing
If you want to.
trouble with the foam retention, yeah, in your final beer, yeah, I would definitely say that the Tetra hop extract is a really good alternative. You can also use some propylene glycol alginates that are a bit of a pain in the ass to use. It's what we sell for foam retention, but I always advise to maybe look for the Tetra hop extract first. And next question from Roland. I just checked if I can get Morado maize in Germany. I see I can get maize flour from blue corn, but they claim that it is treated with nixtamalization, which is cooking in alkaline solution. Will this still work for mashes? Will it still give color to the beer? Jacob, do you want to?
Yeah. So essentially, the cereal cook that you would do on a commercial brew house is a lot like nixtamalizing your softening and allowing the starches to become more digestible through nixtamalization. It's an alkaline. It is an alkaline cooked in an alkaline solution, which again gelatinizes the starches exactly the way you would for pre-gelatinized and flaked corn. So yes, it would absolutely work. But if it's a flour, you run into potential lauter issues. So you just have to kind of prepare for that. That's really the only set drawback to that. That would be hard to deal with, but there could be some glucan enzymes to thin the wort and potential rice holes and stuff. But it's worth. I've known breweries to actually use ground nixtamalized corn, like as if it was for tortillas, pretty finely ground, with good success too. So people have done it. I haven't, but it's definitely possible.
And talking
For the
about the
color,
color,
yeah,
yes.
the color is that's a tricky one. I don't know. At high percentages, I've been able to maintain a little bit of color, but sometimes it drops out. My theory is that it's a pH thing, and the pH results in the changing of the pigment, I don't know about that one. That's a tricky one.
Still on R&D, we're looking into it in the corn utilization guide, but most colored worts we found somebody brewed eventually lose the color during fermentation. So we kind of still have to figure out exactly why and how to go around it. Maybe if you want to keep the color of certain varietals, because some varietals are more likely to conserve the color than others, but usually a very nice ruby colored, pinkish colored, bluish colored wort will become just a blonde beer in the end of fermentation.
And next question is more of a comment from Nisi, that when you have a fermentation that did not resulted in a beer as per your product specification, perhaps by doing a titratable acidity test, you can create a picture of what went wrong. Titratable acidity, pH radio. Yeah, I mean, if you have problems with acid production in your fermentation, yeah, that titratable acidity test will help you, ensuring that you are finding the right problem for your beer. That test will not do much if the problem that you're having is sulfur or diacetyl. And so it's yes, it's a tool to consider for sure. And but yeah, there can be other sensory analysis. Is always, the best analytical tool that we have is still our noses and our sensory panels. But yeah, it's definitely a tool to consider the treatable acidity test. Another question from Mate. I like to match a local water profile for the style. Is there a way to get a local water profile from a couple of the traditional breweries? I mean, at this moment, talking about the traditional breweries, I don't think I have a water profile to share. Uh, I do have a water profile from an award-winning Mexican craft
Right.
lager. I have permission from that brewery to share. I'm happy to send it to you, Nate. And yeah, we hope to be able to expand the data set that we have on water, because as I said before, we don't have a ton of information on it.
And we all have to try and keep having the big boys sharing a little more of their information because they've been doing it for longer.
Yeah, and I can send my Chicago's water if you want to piggyback on that. We get some pretty good results. So.
And next question from Diego Balmoy. What are your thoughts on using maize nixtamalizado? Sorry. Can it be used successfully in brewing? Does it make sense, or does it create too many mash pH issues?
It makes sense. In my opinion, it can be done. I actually did a collab with a brewer friend from Panama that won a medal at Ensenada with nixtamal corn. So again, like Jacob said, it's a matter of experimenting. There's not like a guidebook of what can and cannot be done when it comes to nixtamal. But again, nixtamal has a lot of it makes a lot of things bioavailable out of the corn, and it also helps you out with loosening the hull. And when you loosen the hull, and you can actually, in the traditional nixtamal process, they rub it to take all the hulls, and it becomes just more available in general. So you probably have to, since it is cooked in calcium hydroxide, you will have an alkaline solution, and you will have to consider that in your brewing process. But I've seen many brews with nixtamal corn that are actually pretty successful and very it tastes just fine.
Yeah, it's definitely possible.
So next question from Justin. What specialty malts can be used for dark lagers?
Again, for dark lagers, try to stay away from Munich or Crystal, and well, I guess it depends on how dark you want to go, right? I'm actually got kind of in the middle of a recipe for, I want like a really, really dark Mexican lager at like 4.2% or 4.5. But, for really, really dark, I mean, I would be, in that instance, I would use some color adjusting, some like maybe a little chocolate rye, because I really like its smoothness and how delicate it is, in conjunction with some carafa. But if we're talking about like, let's say like a 30 SRM or darker Vienna, I would stick with Vienna and maybe a little bit of Munich, but Munich can take you over that sensory threshold and kind of start getting a little thicker, fuller, which I think, again, you stop losing what the beer is supposed to be about. But yeah, I guess that's kind of my take. Again, if you want a darker Vienna, then select a darker Vienna, and I think you can get pretty close to mahogany, or not mahogany, but darker amber with some particular kind of Vienna.
I like how Nacho said it. As long as you reach the goal, whatever road you take is valid. Like we said in the presentation, it's not a purity test. We want people to start experimenting with different grain bills, with different hop bills, with different ways of achieving the sensory targets that are expected. So I think that's the cool thing about dark Mexican lagers, especially pitch black ones, which were popular before, but the industry kind of pushed them away from the market in Mexico. So the darker Negra Modelo, Negra León beers are not negras, they're amber. So I think it's cool if we can get with the same level of drinkability and dry finish to have pitch black beers with
Yeah.
this again these layers of complexity from the dark malts, like we said with the heirloom corn. You can have that complexity but never losing the staple drinkability.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm going for. Like, I want a Schwartz beer black, you know. That might be a good reference point, because that is a dark lager with a wisp of dark malt character without being toffee and chocolatey. So I think that could get you close.
All right, next question. We have only 3 left in the Q&A section. So from Olivia, could you comment on using popped corn in the mash? Any advantages or challenges? Are you familiar with that, Jacob?
I've seen it done. It would reason that popcorn is cooked over an extreme amount of heat. Again, like just denaturing a lot of those starches. Like, it would make sense that it could convert. I've seen people brew popcorn pilsners and stuff, and they've said it converted. So I think it's possible for sure.
And not all the corns pop the same way and in this with the same temperature, the same process. Actually, there's a lot of kind of pop different corns in Mexico too. So cacahuacintle, I think it will be a great example, and we actually have a maltster in Mexico doing a cacahuacintle malt, if I'm not mistaken. Nacho, sí, no, Altiplano. I think
I
they have
don't.
a I've never used it to be honest,
Maybe
but
I don't know.
I've read about it. So I think it can definitely be done. Just know your corn and know the exact gelatinization process and specs behind it.
All right, next question from Leopold. What are your 5-day fermentation speed, pitching rate, and roux temperature? Uh, I will say 5-day fermentation is on the shorter end of what you probably will expect for Mexican lagers. Is that what you see, Jacob?
Again, it's depending on the health of my pitch, but yeah, 5-6 days I've seen it hit
All right.
terminal. Not get pretty damn close to terminal. Yeah, 5 days. It might drop a couple of tenths of a Play-Doh, but 5 days. Again, I do a strong ramp up at the end. I'll ferment at 52 or 54, and then ramp it up to about 58 towards the end, just to ensure it finishes pretty strong. So it does have a bit of an accelerated fermentation to it due to just that strong ramp up at the finish, but it doesn't produce it's of no detriment to the beer because it won't crank out any ester or phenolics from that finishing ramp up, at least in my experience. Could be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, from my experience, like a 5-day period to reach terminal gravity is common, but for example, at Laleman, we usually just recommend an additional 48 hours at high temperature just to as a diacetyl rest. Pitching rate, I mean, that will depend on your specific yeast strain that you're using, but common target for lagers 1.5 mil to 2 mil per milliliter per degree Play-Doh, and then you can fine tune against the sensory impacts that you're getting from that pitch rate. Room temperature, that I think room means like the lagering. Am I right on that? I think that's a
Uncertain.
German word.
Is there
But
maybe? I don't know.
yeah, I think that will be like the maturation temperature. So I mean, I see the most standard practice to after diacetyl test is passed, just to quickly, just to send a beer to 0, 1 degrees Celsius, there are some like some brewers, a lot of them like to, instead of doing violent to to decrease the temperature violently, just to decrease the temperature like 2 degrees Celsius per day. Apparently that's a possibility to get clear beer. As I said, if you hit the target of what you want, just you can try different things, and try the other things that work in your brewery for lager. If it helps to it. To do a cold crash quickly, great. If you prefer to, to do it slower, whatever works for you is fine. So next question from Matthias: Is there any beer made with maize and rice at the same time? Yeah, definitely yes. We've seen a lot
Many.
of of the Mexican lagers made by the craft brewers in Mexico. They are using a combination of both. And we also see Mexican lagers only made with rice. For example, we like to talk a lot more about corn because of its significance. But yeah, even in the commercial industrial breweries like Pacifico is, I believe, only made with rice actually instead of corn.
Yeah, and many industrial historical beers, whether they exist today or not, have used both adjuncts.
Yeah. And I think it's the last question from Dustin. Gracias a todos. I was wondering if sponding valves, higher temps, have been used with success in your Mexican lagers. And
I've
I don't.
yeah.
Oh, sorry. I mean, I don't remember knowing specifically hearing a comment about that, but I can't see why not. Why it wouldn't work, or if
Yeah,
it worked with other beers.
definitely have bunged. I don't have spinning valves, but I can bung. If I know, I mean, I've been using the same yeasts for a long time. I know what to expect, and I can hit anywhere from like 1/8 to 2 volumes of carb if I'm really timely with when I'm bunging, and so yeah, it's totally doable, and as long as it's not over carbing or putting, it shouldn't even really put that much stress on your yeast. Totally possible. Wouldn't see why not.
Yeah. Also, I will just advise to be a little bit careful, because yes, you can decrease the esters that your yeast produces, but it can it can cause a higher amount of sulfur and diacetyl in the end. So just make sure to be careful on that. And if it works, it works.
Yeah.
So I think we've run through all of the questions. Once again, here are our emails in case there's something that we left unanswered that probably got lost in the chat. Again, really happy to share a panel again with Alex and Jacob. Thanks everyone to connect. I mean, we ran over 2 hours and there's still 140 people in
Yeah,
the
that's great.
session, so it's really cool.
Amazing. And thanks, Laleman, for organizing this and keeping the conversation going. We're very excited to see so many people actually eager to brew Mexican lagers. And hopefully, after everything we've researched and everything we're trying to spread, lagers with more authentic flair to them.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. If you have any questions, just reach out.
Yeah, and a reminder that the recording will be available at the same link if you want to come back. Well, thank you.
Pleasure, everybody.
Thank you.